All right, well, let's get started then. My name is Nick Boersma. I'm a research scientist at Iowa State University. Also, one of Emily's first grad students and her first PhD student, which feels like just yesterday, but it's becoming more apparent every day that that was not just yesterday. It was quite some time ago. Um, I don't have as much experience with Miscanthus though as Steve Schomberg, our speaker, one of our speakers for today. Steve was the first Iowa Miscanthus grower, as far as I know, farmer anyway. He has what, 62 acres now there that you're growing. So for most of the people on the call, they don't need much introduction to Steve, so I'm looking forward to hearing from him today. Allison Bishop is also going to be joining in on this presentation. She's an ISU alum, which I found out today when we were in the field. One of my colleagues said, I went to undergrad with Allison Bishop, and that was Jacob Stutes. I don't know if you remember Jacob at
Yeah,
all. But
yeah.
yeah, so some ties to ISU. She now works at Hertz Management as a licensed real estate salesperson and an accredited farm manager. So that's going to be some really good practical experience from these two speakers today. I want to mention and thank the sponsors listed on this slide for today and for supporting this webinar series, especially this webinar series is brought to you by Iowa State University and the University of Illinois. Today, more Iowa State University, I guess. So, what's on the next slide? Let's see. The next seminar series talk will be from Gabby Blocker talking about sunflower fuels. And after that, the week after July 30th, we have another member of our lab, Brian Peterson, is going to be talking about growing miscanthus in a computer. So I think that'll probably be a pretty good talk as well. Brian does a great job. We're gonna be really in a hard spot when he leaves. And then finally, I want to remind everyone about the first International Miscanthus Summit being held October 26th through 29th. Um, Make sure you check out the website go.illinois.edu/miscanthus slash or hyphen summit. So make sure you check that out, scan the QR code. It's going to be 2 days of research, 2 days of industry, one global summit from discovery to translation. Sounds like an amazing time. And if Emily's involved, I know it'll be great and useful. So, with that, I'll stop talking and let Steve and Allison take the floor and let us know about their practical experience with Miscanthus in Iowa and profitability.
Well, thank you, Nick. I appreciate the introduction. Good to see you again. Um, when Emily mentioned to me that she wanted to hear from a grower, and I began to think about what it was that I might talk about, I kept coming back to a very personal relationship that I had with Miscanthus, meaning that when it comes to perennials, of which Miscanthus is one, it's an emotional relationship. And I don't know how whether that's true of other growers or not, but for me, it's not unlike people feel about farming, I think. There's a there's a piece of emotion there that engages you in the process. I was raised on an Iowa farm. Uh, Somewhere along the way in college, I chose a major outside of agriculture and ended up with a career in higher education administration. But I got lucky in 2005 when I was ready to retire. I was actually introduced to Miscanthus that year, and that sort of started my romance, if you will, with the plant. Um, Hertz Farm Management came into our picture in 1992 when Dad no longer could really deal with the complexity of marketing, and especially, and Mom said to me, "We got to do something, Steve." Uh, I had I knew the Hertz family from my 4-H days, and there was an office not far from the University of Illinois where I worked, and so I made a contact, and then we made an arrangement to meet on the farm um, with Dad and Mom, and within sort of 30 minutes, Dad says, "Let's just do it." So we've been a partner with Hertz ever since. It's fun to share with Allison. Allison is a newer farm manager. Jim Rapoon was our farm manager for many years. Um, we've gone through a transition with Jim's retirement, and Allison's been now a couple of years our farm manager, and it's been a great experience for us. So when I retired, I'm a bit of an analytic guy, strategic thinking kind of person. So um, I wrote down what are the things that I wanted to do in retirement, and one of them is that I wanted to commit my love and commitment to the environment with my love of agriculture. In 2005, it was a time where agriculture was getting banged pretty badly about its environmental footprint, and I wanted to try to wed those two forces together. I thought about how to do that. One was to return portions of our farm to a pre-settlement landscape with grasslands and forests. There is a bit of a romance in me, romantic view, but my dad told me stories of when he was a young boy, neighbor telling the story of his dad. And so that's two generations riding a horse through where our farm was. And the grasses were taller than the man's head. And I just kind of said, wow, I want that again to have that experience on our land. So then I became interested in perennial agriculture and started reading that literature and visited the Land Institute out in Salina, Kansas, got introduced to Kernza, which was the crop they were working on at the time. Uh, then for a long time, have been pretty much an outdoors person with a strong interest in birding and wildlife. But in the bottom, I also knew that overseeing this farm with my sisters, after we inherited from Dad and Mom, that it needed to also have a financially successful side. So it wasn't all romance. Part of it was also focusing on how can we run a successful farm with perennials and so forth. So my teachers, just one of my favorite pictures of Dad and Mom in the feedlot. Um, they were known as cattle persons. Uh, Dad was awarded several awards for his livestock management. Um, and as long as the grain was going into beef, farming was easy for him. But as soon as we had to start selling the grain into the market, that's when Hertz came into the picture. It just became a pattern that didn't work well. When people would say, "Well, why would you pay somebody else to make these farming decisions?" And Mom's response always was, "Well, we make more money now than we did." And that always seemed to shut people up. So we've been very happy with Hertz Farm Management. So there were some key moments along the way. The we had the farm I grew up on. My grandparents had a farm about 5 miles north of there. That was an historical farm. It had been purchased in 1846. Some of the first 80 acres was purchased in 1846 from the Iowa Territory. I grew up walking those fields um, as a grandson and very much enjoyed that that landscape because our farms lie right in the break between timber and prairie. So um, the farm I grew up on was much more prairie soils. the farm that we inherited was much more timber soils. Um, when scouting the farm, I could see I couldn't. It was hard for me to see why my grandparents and uncle were farming some of the fields they did, just given their slope and given isolation from creek systems and so forth. But I guess it's just what you did. But I looked for some different ideas, and that's when hearing Emily speak at a conference at Iowa State. I attended a couple of ag days and trying to learn more about farming. I was totally taken with the idea of how you could look at the farm ground as a landscape and make choices about crops based on best fit. Um, so that had a huge impact on my being quickly ready to say yes to Miscanthus. And then I was introduced to Miscanthus when I worked at Illinois, and Emily was there. She was a grad student at the time, finishing her degree. And the lieutenant governor uh, wanted to come to campus and see what Illinois was doing in terms of green energy. And so Miscanthus was a keystone of that research. I was in government relations, so I was assigned to be his host. So that's what was I sort of was the only ag person on the University of Illinois administration outside of the College of Agriculture. So I always got the good assignments of whenever anybody was interested in ag, they turned to me. Um, so in 2013, then I am having coffee at church, and the head of the power plant is also attending the same church. He said, Steve, by the way, we've just made a decision to lease some land to grow miscanthus. Would you be interested? And I didn't even hesitate. So I answered the call for proposal, filled out the applications, began to understand why people I worked with in the community from Illinois was frustrated with our process. Pretty complicated to just lease 15 acres that I had to go through. But I did, was successful, and I began to grow miscanthus. Other perennials that people can think about, miscanthus is the only one that I know that that's not true. Kernza is also having some success. Um, there are growers in Western Iowa, in Minnesota. It's successful in those locations because there is a local market. There's a mill that will grind it. There are um, flowers that are being produced. You can buy them online, which I have done. And there's beer being made out of Kernza. It's a very light beer. They were selling it in Iowa City for a while. I don't know if it's still being sold uh, or not. But anyway, uh, I was quite interested in Kernza. Our location in southeast Iowa was not a good location for them. They wanted something more in the northern Iowa, southern Wisconsin kind of area. And then I discovered the forever green research going on at the University of Minnesota. And these are different perennials that they have worked with over time. So back to the idea of the landscape. When we had a good experience with the first 15 acres, Iowa wanted to expand its footprint. And so I wanted to be a part of that second round of proposals. So I talked with our farm operator about where would be good places to put miscanthus fields. And we quickly settled on this dark green area, one partly because of the steep terraces that had been put in, were hard to farm with modern equipment. Um, and the second, because of the yield monitor data. I think everybody on this webinar probably knows that Iowa uses the corn suitability rating to indicate the quality of the soils. And if you look at the fields where we were raising corn and soybeans, as you go be my left, looking at the screen, screen's right. Uh, as you went through the field from east to west, the soils suddenly deteriorated. And Mike told me that his yield monitor just plunged whenever he hit uh, the western section of the fields. And he said he'd be more than happy to give up uh, those 20 acres if I wanted to put it in Miscanthus. So it's what we did. It's been a great decision. It grows pretty good Miscanthus. There are parts of the field where the crop is thinner than in other because of the very sandy nature of a piece of the field. But it fits very well with the rest of the field, which is relatively flat and decent corn and soybean beaker, uh, soybean crop. Just north of there, we have quite a bit of timber, an area we call enviro acres. And then north of there, we've planted quite a bit of prairie. We have 120 acres now of restored prairie. Uh, just one small section is actually native prairie that was never plowed, uh, although it was overseeded with timothy. And so we've been working to get rid of the timothy. So some observations I have as a grower. The whole process of growing miscanthus uh, is really only possible, I think, in a partnership with an ag services organization like Agrotech. Uh, it's been a wonderful relationship. And the other factor I could quickly say was also having the support of people like Emily and Hertz Farm Management, who didn't hesitate when I approached them about wanting to raise miscanthus. They were eager to help make it happen so that they could learn also, and they saw its advantages coming up. Old phrase, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. So there are 15 acres that we seeded and paid for ourselves rather than lease to Iowa because I wanted to experiment with whether I could make it economically profitable. I quickly learned that uh, markets are everything. And so finding local markets for miscanthus was very, very difficult. I had a few livestock people who used the bedding, but the chip market, uh, I had to have the help of Agrotech to sell that to Evergreen Nursery, who makes erosion control socks out of it. But that's without their help, I couldn't even have a chance of, and Allison will talk more about that. Um, I keep thinking there ought to be a more complex set of soil ratings other than just the CSR, some sustainability ratings or that would based on past cropping history as to whether you've taken care of improved the field by growing a crop, either like prairie or miscanthus. Um, and then one of the things that has always stuck in my mind is, and I borrow this from Emily also, is that miscanthus is a lot like soybeans in that there are many, many uses in the commercial products area. But miscanthus also is a cover crop. It's got great habitat. Um, it has lots of functions, and that, as a landowner, I like that. So the the interface between corn and prairie and miscanthus is sort of seamless in the sense that you can choose where productivity tells you you want to draw the line and can draw it. They interact well. someday I just expect to be choosing between corn and miscanthus as an economic model. And that's because of the pipeline of products that are coming. Um, can't thank places like Illinois and Iowa State enough for laboratories that work on product development and industry, which is interested in finding uses. So this picture of my family as they walk down the lane toward the timber struck me with miscanthus on one side, crop fields, pasture, sort of my landscape, all in one place. I'll turn it over now to Allison, who will share some of her experiences as a farm manager. Allison?
Yeah. Thank you, Steve. You really make it easy to kind of go straight in. I think, like you mentioned, I am the predecessor of Jim Rapoon from our office. He has been with Hertz or had been with Hertz for what was it, over 40 years. And so he really kicked off working with you, Steve, and your family on the miscanthus. And I've been with you guys for a few years now, but overall, I've been with Hertz Farm Management since 2020, so a little bit over 6 years now. And I think just to kind of set the stage of what we do, we help farmland owners make confident and informed decisions to achieve their ownership goals financially, emotionally, and relationally. And I think Steve hit a couple of these points. It's an emotional standpoint for him, and then it's got to have that financial sense as well. So we want to make sure it makes sense for clients. And then a little bit about what we cover for farm management services. So we have just over 3,000 farms or a little over 650,000 acres under management. And we have 14 offices. So there's 6 in Iowa, 2 in Nebraska, 4 in Illinois, 1 in Minnesota, and then we have an Arizona office. And we primarily work with absentee landowners. So people who most likely inherited the farm, or they used to operate the farm, or their parents used to operate the farm, and now they have ownership, but they most likely worked off the farm. We also work with some investors as well, who maybe purchased farmland in the 80s or 90s. But we always like to remind people, majority of our clients own their farmland as individuals or as multiple family members. We also see the trust, some colleges and churches, and then family LLCs, but a lot of it is family driven. And that goes back to we like to reach out to our clients to understand what their primary goals are. And so we recently have done a survey with just over, or it was right around 650 clients. And 65% of our clients have family members interested in continuing ownership. So we always talk about that legacy side of things. And as you start looking at the next generation, what are they wanting to do to the land to continue the success of the farm? And we deal with a lot of different lease types. About half of our leases are in cash rent, so the farm owners don't have as much as say as if you were in a participating lease, which roughly the other half are in a cash or a custom operation or a modified crop share lease type, where they're in control of the inputs and the grain on their side of things. But our cash rent owners consistently put stewardship of the land as their top concern over financial priority in the survey. So having that put as number one, they're having in mind what is happening to the land. And then for participating leases, it's consistently in the top 3. And why is this important? We start looking at how we manage the farm. What can we do for edge of field planning? So we know it attracts pollinators that help crop pollination for soybeans. Water quality is a big topic for us. So if you ever venture to the Hertz website and look at our most recent egg update, we have an article about water quality, especially with some of the news with this spring where the last few years we've had dry years. And this year has been a very wet year. We're seeing some of that excess nitrogen in our water quality and the nitrate loss. And then also looking at taking less productive land out of the corn soybean rotation. Steve hit on this pretty good. When you look at the landscape, are there certain areas of a farm that aren't making money when you're putting in the same inputs for the land that is having better yields? And primarily our option right now is CRP, or the Conservation Reserve Program, through the NRCS office. So just an example is I have a client just north of Cedar Rapids where we had 5 acres that every year you could tell the yield monitors, similar to Steve's, would always drop off, but you were still putting on the same inputs. And this land also happened to be along an open creek. So you start to wonder how much of those inputs are actually staying on the land. It was mostly sandy soils versus going into that open water source. And so we decided to take it out of production and put it into CRP, having a better outcome for the environment and financially. And so that becomes that income and expense risk management. Clients are always asking for what a third crop option would be. And their concern is the sustainability of the soil and diversifying income. You see corn and soybean markets are not always the most stable, especially when you consider the last 5 years, everything that has changed. And then just the variability of our weather too, being able to make that soil more resilient to our weather patterns that are changing. And so looking at that third crop, whether it be a perennial or something else that can be coinciding with a corn soybean rotation, clients are asking. The difficult side of that though, and Steve mentioned this as well, is having a market for it. So we always tell clients, if you can find a market, we can help you with deciding on maybe how you market that crop. But the limiting factor is that market side of things. But the other beneficial side of it is the expense side and having that risk management, where if you have a third crop, most likely has different input needs, and then can also be beneficial for the corn soybean rotation as well when you look at fertilizer, herbicides, and other pesticides that are needed. So just having a better rotation and being able to see those benefits. And then this is an analysis on the Schomberg land that has the 15.6 acres of miscanthus that they own and operate individually. So it's not leased to the University of Iowa. So this is harvested and sold for this erosion control socks in Iowa City. And we just did a quick 5-year analysis to show what that income looks like. And on average, it's around $175 an acre income. And so that's primarily, this is just specifically looking at the what is sold for the control socks, or the erosion control socks. If we add back in for or if you look at, Steve also does baling of the miscanthus. So he takes another, is it 6 to 8 inches, Steve, if I remember correctly, and sells that as small squares for bedding for local livestock producers in the area. That adds an additional $40 to $50 an acre of income. So it really does help, and it's not losing money. So it's a great option in this specific area. And another part of the crop management is to look at improving the soil health with the perennial crop, with that continued use or continued living root in the soil. We have that improved water infiltration and soil microbiome. So being able to capture that alongside your corn soybean rotation helps with the soil as well. And then we're still looking at the soil samples to make sure nutrient levels are adequate. So every 4 years, we're doing that to make sure things aren't going backwards, because we're still harvesting a crop. So looking at those key nutrients of phosphorus and potassium. And then the reason why we were looking at miscanthus on this 15 acres was we were working with some specialty contracts to have solutions outside of the corn soybean rotation. So kind of similar to what Steve was showing on some of the other family land. Where this cropland is highlighted in the green, we rotate this into seed corn production. And where the miscanthus is, it has higher slope, lower soil quality. You can see where the soil changes here quickly. And so the seed corn company just had no desire of growing seed corn on there. And so then you were looking at having to have isolation because you got to have 330 feet of isolation for the seed corn. Having a continued soybean rotation, it's just not feasible long term. And so being able to implement the miscanthus, which will last 15 plus years, helps with that rotation and not having to deal with a continuous soybean rotation. We also have a lot of clients looking at carbon capture and credits. Everyone has heard about the offsets. I mean, this was a big thing here in the last 5, 6 years, and then now with the 45Z tax credit. So I think miscanthus can play a role in this, or any perennial crop can play a role in this. It's not as heavily targeted in the market when you talk about it. People are targeting the corn soybean because they're wanting that change in practice to be able to show that the carbon capture is there. But I think if you're changing in practice from a corn soybean rotation to a miscanthus or another perennial, I don't understand why you couldn't be able to work with someone on credits or carbon capture in those acres as well. So it's another factor to maybe continue to boost the income per acre with utilizing some of the programs that are out there. And these are just a few headlines that when we're looking at things or watching things, things that people have talked about, and then companies that we've discussed carbon with as well, or worked with in the past for clients. That is all we really had today, but you can always look at our website online and then reach out to either Steve or I regarding any questions about growing miscanthus on a particular farm. And I don't know, do we have any time
All
for
yours, Nick.
questions, Nick?
Yeah, I think we do. We're at like 33 minutes, and I think we should have
Perfect.
at least 10, 15 minutes, probably at least for questions or more. So people can feel free to post those questions in the chat or just get on their mic and ask if they'd like. So I'll open it up to the field to see who is the brave first question asker.
Hello,
Yep, go ahead.
can you hear me?
Yep.
Michael Moss from Energy and Seed Limited. I produce the miscanthus seeds in Europe. Very nice talks. Thank you very much. Nice to see what's going on the other side of the ocean. And I got this feeling that, years are passing and the market is really not picking up as well as Europe, as in US. And everything what Allison say is based on subsidy, which we are trying to actually completely reduce and go out from it, from this idea in Europe, and just based on the market. Do you see this, Allison, as the really the barrier and the potential problem for the farmers to not having this market and only rely on very nice environmental subsidies and carbon credits, but still rely on the subsidy rather than on market pooling and take this biomass for the innovation products? What is your feelings? And Steve, is also for you as the grower. I know that you say that you're selling for some bedding and for some nurseries and other small businesses, but can you see this as the one of the main barrier? Because we recognize this as the one of the main barrier in Europe, that this innovation is just too slow. Thank you. But thank you very much for sharing your experience. And I like, Stephen, this emotional part, really like.
of course, what I'm going to give you is opinion, but I think that there is a growing market out there, and I think that in my mind, you have to think of it as a specialty crop, not a full-size commercial crop, but as a specialty crop, it has a future, and that's the way I'm thinking about it. And that specialty crop, again, agrotech has helped a lot in helping develop markets. I think that its market as sort of combustible fuel, that's very limited, and that probably will not continue. But uh, our Farm Bureau organization just recently published a nice piece on menthol fuel that miscanthus could play a big role in, given its cellulose basis. So I think as we get into more e-fuels and so forth, you're going to see miscanthus being more interesting and a more profitable future. So I'm actually fairly optimistic that the new products will come out that will drive this specialty market.
Yeah, I would agree. I think um, the reason why we have a lot of clients asking about a third crop or an alternate crop is because they want that diversification piece to reduce the need for the subsidies and just go off of market. So it's a want out there. It's not that people don't want it. I would agree that it's the adoption of being able to have the market and commercialize it, and where do you go from there? But I would echo Steve's thoughts on I'm optimistic that it will continue to grow. What that growth will look like is the question, and how fast it can go.
Thank you very much. I'm sharing this optimism with you for last 22 years. So I really hope that's one day, one day we will see it really really happening. Yes. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Any other questions? Otherwise, I could fill some time with the question. Um, I don't see anyone, so I think the water quality part with miscanthus is a really nice common ground we can find with a lot of different people. How do you think we could I don't know, increase the view of miscanthus being used to for that? I mean, there has been a lot of momentum around cover crops. But miscanthus probably has a higher potential to remove nitrates from water if put in the right places. So, how do you think we could leverage that to potentially as a carrot, not necessarily a market per se, but, you know, an incentive,
Mhm.
um, to get more acres on the ground?
I think there's a really large push with the edge of field practices, such as the saturated buffers and the bioreactors, or even just filter strips in general in the state of Iowa, to address those concerns. And so right now, like I said before, the only option really is to participate in the CRP. Well, that's not a harvestable part of the land then. So maybe it's something that miscanthus takes those acres where it's still productive soil. It gives that barrier from the crop ground to any open stream or any of the areas where it would be a filter. Um, I could see that being part of the landscape, um, and helping with those solutions that we need for the water quality side of things. And I think we have a lot of clients that do the stream side buffers, and I think we actually had some of the clients out of our Cedar Falls office be the first ones in the state of Iowa to install prairie strips in their farms, and even install maybe the first couple bioreactors in the state of Iowa as well for water quality purposes.
Yeah, I think
Thanks.
that the work that Iowa State has done is important in this regard, but I would add to it that I think we have to think about combining prairie with miscanthus.
Mhm.
That prairie act as a buffer between the stream and the miscanthus field, and then the miscanthus field act as a barrier or a buffer between that and your agricultural field with all the inputs of nitrogen and pesticides and herbicides that act as a, because the root systems really suck up a lot of those nutrients and keep them from the stream. But I think miscanthus right next to a stream is not such a good idea, just because you don't want it flowing down the rhizomes flowing down the stream accidentally.
Right.
That's a really good point. The one thing I've seen with like Sacchariflorus is if it's growing along a creek, you can usually find a few patches downstream.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
There's one question in the chat from Rob, who asks if a farmer were to grow miscanthus on great soil, how much better does miscanthus grow over marginal soil as compared to corn? So I think the question is, what's the difference between miscanthus and corn on good soil versus miscanthus and corn on marginal soil?
We've got roughly 6 acres of sod that we it was pasture that's kind of isolated that we put it into miscanthus that would be excellent corn ground. And it's the highest miscanthus yields, I think, around our area anyway. Our harvesters are always talking about wow. So I think, you put miscanthus in excellent soil, it's really going to enjoy it and grow great. But it also grows pretty well in more marginal soils where corn is much more uh, likely to dry up quickly. You get burned down, quickly, where with miscanthus, your tons drop, but you still get a crop. So miscanthus does better on marginal soils than corn, and certainly as good as corn in good soils.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially in bad years, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree. And then you start factoring into what your input levels are on that per acre of corn versus the miscanthus. And you have a lot less on miscanthus than corn.
Mhm. Thanks for the question, Rob. Does anyone else have any questions? I don't see anything in the chat. I don't see any hand raising emojis in the participant list. So I think we could probably go ahead and wrap up. I think most of these end up around 40 minutes or so. So I want to thank Steve and Allison again for the very informative presentation from real life experience. And I personally really appreciate that and appreciate you guys taking the time to share that with us.